Hey, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to the Diverse Bookshelf. So today we're going to go back in time a little bit to the early 2000s and a time when I was starting to actually be more serious about my writing and learning how to do it, and by going to the bookstore and looking at books on how to do it properly. And even though the book I found was actually, I think, out for a few years at that time, because I didn't really start taking this stuff seriously, I think until like the mid-2000s, this one was certainly one of the early ones I bought, and that's writing the Breakout novel by Maass. And one thing, I'm going to get a little closer. And Maass has since written a few other books that are probably, I wouldn't say better or worse, just kind of more, important for the times. Whereas I think this is one of his first books that he produced for writers. But I still think it's one of the base important ones because it is a foundational book for any author who's just starting out to really know all the components that they want to look at. And the reason why I'm covering it when I probably honestly don't need to at this point, when I've covered so many other books like it, both last season and this one, I think it's worth bringing back because it is one of the early books that I read and one of the first books to really help me get my course in the right direction. Not that I've perfected it back then, but certainly it got me thinking a little bit more in lines of what makes a story worth reading. But it was also the kind of book where I feel like it just incorporated all the necessary elements that you would expect to find in a book, and where a lot of books nowadays are more targeted towards specific sections. Like we spent all season talking about character and books, on character, and then talking about settings and books and settings and so on. Each book having its own particular element. What this one is about is essentially giving you the primer of just all the things you want to consider. So if you are new to writing, I would recommend definitely putting this one on your list, because this is a good introductory book to get you to really know what you're getting yourself into. And the other thing too is if you want something that ties all of our previous lessons together, that's another advantage of checking this one out. So again, this is like the base book of his entire series. He's got like 4 or 5 books now, all of them kind of expanding on the premise that this original book established. And I am going to cover, I think, all of his books at some point. I've got 2 more for this season, and I think I'm going to do his others next season. But I wanted to just, I was debating whether or not to even cover it this season because it is so much like the stuff we've already covered. But I think it's important because it hits all the checks. Structure, like, that's the one thing is, it's only it's like 250, a little over 250, and so you're cramming an entire college semester's worth of information in 250 pages, and by that I'm actually being sarcastic, because college would never cover half the stuff that's in this book, so you're actually getting a lot more than that. But the thing is because each section is roughly 20 pages each, 25 pages, you're clearly not going to get the entire devoted focus on any one thing, but it is enough to kind of get you in that gear, that mindset, and open you up to more exploratory ideas. And the other thing is, like, all the books we cover, there's certainly elements in this book that you're not going to really find too much overlap in with others. So, and I'll outline those when I get there. But let's go ahead and I just want to look at the table of contents. I'm going to be doing most of my commentary on this because I read this. I think probably would have been like 2005 or 2006 when I read this, and it came out in 2001. So my memory of the book as a whole is very weak right now, and I'm not going to reread the whole thing just for a video. But what I can do is I can show you what each section covers so that you can make your own decision of whether it's something you want. I just remember I thought it was really beneficial and really helpful. And the other thing to factor in is who Maass is. He's not just a guy who has a successful thriller on the market who happened to decide he knew it all because he had that one book that happened to not only get picked up but happened to maybe sell a few thousand copies. Any of you in the indie writers market probably knows that story pretty well, because we have a lot of gurus out there who had one successful book and thinks suddenly they're experts, when no, you just got lucky, or you did something right, but maybe you didn't know what you did right. Either way, Donald Maass, he's actually a literary agent, not just a writer. So literary agents, they're the ones who are your gateway into the publishing market if you go traditional. And I know back in the mid-2000s, the only people I wanted to listen to were the agents because they're the ones that had the potential of giving me a career. And so if I follow the agent's advice, I thought that was going to be my best shot at getting a book worth, submitting. Now, did I ever go that path? I mean, there was a book I wrote in the mid-2000s that I didn't fully abandon, but I ended up shelving for the time being, not because it was a bad book. I think to this day it's still one of my most celebrated books. Problem is the character was all wrong, or what he did for a living. I didn't measure up to the reality of what that job does, and I had to go back and even though I had researched it, it was not. I probably could have done better research, and that's going to be a focus for next season. But what I still liked the way the book was laid out, and I think a lot of it was confirmed through my readings of books like this. But nevertheless, I wanted to improve on my presentation because books like this showed me where I was weak or where I could have been better. So let's just quickly go through what's in here, and then again, you guys can decide what you want to do with it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this particular book because, again, it's been a long time, and I don't want to give you false information based on a faulty memory. But if you hear the table of contents and we discuss why it's important, I think you can get a sense of why this book is worth reading, even though it is 20 years old at this point. So there's a foreword from an author named Ann Perry, and Ann Perry is the author that he uses as his base of reference. Whenever he covers a strategy in each chapter, he'll use her book as the example. So I thought that was, they don't really do that much anymore. Like nowadays, it's just scattered information. I think Lisa Cron was the only one I can think of off the top of my head who had a consistent example, and then Larry Brooks had one, and Great Stories Don't Write Themselves. Went back to his friend who wrote a thriller, and I think it's called My Sister's Grave or something like that. And that person also gave it forward. So maybe this cycle is going back to that system. But there's a lot of books like in the mid 2010s that I felt like they just they want to throw examples in from all sources. And it's funny because they all end up using the same sources anyway. Like I just noticed even in here they're referring to Robert Waller, the guy who wrote Bridges of Madison County, Robert James Waller, I think his name is. And I mean, how many books are going to reference Bridges of Madison County? The other question is how many people saw the movie. I haven't. Anyway, let's look at the contents because this is the classic book in my opinion, and definitely one worth reading, even if you're already saturated with other reading material. This one's good. All right, so we have the introduction. You have the power to break out and how to use this book. Okay, pretty standard. Then you have why write the breakout novels. Now, I think the key is in the title, the breakout novel. What is a breakout novel? Well, it's something we don't have much anymore because agencies don't like to take risks anymore. But back in the early 2000s, that was still a model of first success. In fact, Harry Potter, I think, only had, I think it was only on Goblet of Fire at that point. So there was still a wide open market for new discovery. And so at the time that this came out, this was a pretty revolutionary topic for a book. So definitely one. I wouldn't be surprised if this book didn't break out in those days. But why we write the breakout novel? The truth about book publishing, the truth about authors, and the myth of success, the e-revolution. That was at the birth of the internet, and then where to go from here. So in this case, straight from the heart and mind of a literary agent, he's going to give you the straight scoop on what to expect getting into the industry, and also what to expect if you happen to get represented. So he has the myth of success. Big advance equals instant fame. I think we've all figured out in the last 20 years that that's not true. But yeah, he just gives you a reality check right at the start, which I think is really helpful. And then he has the e-revolution, where it looks like, I'm not sure if he's referring to self-publishing or just the fact that books can go on electronics. But he does address the transition. Now, again, 20 years later, this is actually, I think, be an interesting time capsule for those of you who read this in the year 2021. or later, because you're going to be able to look in hindsight whether or not his predictions were correct. That doesn't necessarily indicate whether or not he's a teacher worth listening to or worth rejecting, because no one can really know what, right now we have audiobooks is catching fire, and then we'll probably have some kind of like NFT book, or we'll probably have I don't know about AI fiction, because who wants to read that? That's gonna be crazy. But I'm sure at some point we might use like interactive video game fiction more commonly. YouTube fiction. There's probably different areas of development on the horizon that we could dismiss today and think, well, that's ridiculous. But even as I record this, Amazon is prepping writers for their new platform called Kindle Vella, which as of this recording is not officially open to readers yet, but by the time this goes live, it very well could be. It'll be interesting to see what happens with that, but it follows in the footsteps of Wattpad. And who would have thought that Wattpad would have actually taken off, because it's a free platform to both to write and to read, and it's so saturated at this point it's hard to be discovered unless you're also in social media, and it's crazy, but somehow it ended up attracting over 65 million readers. So whatever predictions people make, they can't really know unless they look at hindsight and speculate what that looks like going forward. I mean, once upon a time, print media didn't make any sense. Once upon a time, it was just drama, just Shakespeare. So what can you do? So that's chapter 1. And then chapter 2, this is assuming you want to write the breakout novel. You start talking about premise. So I know Larry Brooks covers premise a lot, and of course the Donald Maass book came out even sooner than that. But premise is the whole reason why your book is attractive to readers. So he has a chapter on that. So the stories that you love, 4 facets of 3 great novels, the little components of big ideas, build it, and the breakout premise will come in the brainstorming and the breakout premise. So he's not going to leave you hanging. He wants to make sure even before you start writing you have an idea worth exploring. So then comes chapter 3. Now this is one that, again, not a lot of books cover, and I think more should, and I would love to see some author out there, or somebody in the Writer's Digest market or the 10-speed press market, to get on board with this idea and make an entire book about it. Because this is one of the things where, again, I think I've explained in other videos that one of my great struggles is with character motivation. Well, as an offshoot of that, I also struggle with what we call stakes. And so the stakes are the elements that make the fiction compelling and the character story interesting. And it's the opposition against his goal. If protagonist doesn't do this, then enemy will do this, and protagonist will suffer as a result. And so the stakes are, you have creating high human worth, public stakes, personal stakes. Public stakes would be like the big bomb, or national debt crisis, tanks our economy, or a pandemic disease might accidentally shut down the world. I mean, that's an outrageous thought, right? It's fiction. It would never happen. Personal stakes, losing your business because the pandemic actually happened. Escalating stakes, you can't go back to work because your business died. or your business is about, well, I shouldn't lie, that actually happens to people, that's not funny, but the idea is that it's if you're trying to prevent that from happening, the escalating stakes might be the ticking clock, the days continue to get closer to that deadline where if you don't reopen, you're going to lose your well-being, you're going to lose your family's well-being, and then you're going to be on the street, your own stakes, and so on. So those would be, I think it'd be a great topic for a book, stakes. Just have an entire developed idea of how to build them, how to make them effective. And even the one I covered on plot twist, I feel like has a little bit of that ingrained in it, and just in the nature of it. But it's just, you don't want to underscore or devalue how much the stakes are important in your story, no matter what the story is. Even in a romance, the stakes might be, if the protagonist doesn't get her man, she's going to give up on life because she's already been through this wash cycle so many times that she's sick of it, wants nothing else to do with it. And if Bobby doesn't come through and do his part to be a man, and Jill is going to just be like, you know what, I'm done. Well, we don't want Jill to be done. We like Jill, hopefully. I like Jill. Do you like Jill? So we want to root for her to get her man, and the stakes couldn't be higher because Jill's going to give up, and Jill's not the kind of person we want to give up. So we like Jill. Time and place, chapter 4, psychology of place, keeping up with the times, working with historical forces and social trends, got to work in the world, and the secret ingredient. Actually, let's see what the secret ingredient is. Let's just spoil the book. Why don't we? Or I could not tell you the secret ingredient, and you can read for yourself what that is. I think we're going to do that. Because, here's the tease. The great novelists of the past and the breakout novelists of today employ many approaches to setting, but all have one element in common. Ooh, what's that element? My finger's on it, but I'm not going to tell you because you have to read the book. But anyway, dealing with how the scenes, how the settings, how all that. Again, we talked about that a lot in the active setting and in the settings thesaurus. But again, this is another way of reemphasizing how to use setting to your advantage and looking at how the setting affects your character and your reader, and of course being relevant with both modern times and historical times and so on. And you can even count that with how much does setting ever really change throughout history, and how different are people in history. Like no one really changes. There's just our trends change, our times change, but our nature doesn't. So it does make you wonder. So chapter 5 is on characters. So you have real people versus larger than life figures. What makes a character larger than life? Dark protagonist. Highest character qualities. Building a cast. Advanced character relationships. Sidekicks and narrators. That one sounds good. Depth and differentiation of character. So you have plenty of stuff to work with in the character section. And I know I haven't actually shown you the inside of the book yet, and I know by this point I would have. So let's do that now. I don't want to lose my place, but here's the character section, and you can see how we talk about at the bottom there. We got the real life figures versus the larger than life, and I think the point he's making is when we have people who are ordinary, there is a market for ordinary people, but the larger than life people are the ones we really pay attention to, and it's those are the ones that keep our interest, and they're the ones that write the stories. And even think about our political figures. Who rises to the top the fastest? Who doesn't? Think about our actors and actresses. Who joins the A list and who hits the D list. There's an interesting dynamic in who makes which list. So that's I think what he's getting at there. But then you have all the other components that we look for in a character, and those things that we've covered in previous books. Okay, then you have chapter 6, plot. So this is where you have conflict, again, an important part of plot. I mean, he goes right out the gate with conflict. 5 basic plot elements. Bridging conflict, what is the worst that can happen? So this is something that a lot of writers and agents and storytellers and experts will all preach, is that you don't want to make life easy on your character or your reader. You want to try to give them the absolute worst that's still believable. In other words, don't drop an asteroid on them, because is that believable? More importantly, is it believable that they'll actually get out of that situation? Clearly, you want to be wise about how far it's too far, to the point of where it gets absurd. It's again an area where I struggle, because sometimes I take it to the extreme and I come up with something absolutely ridiculous in the name of making it worse. But you want to find that natural balance between realistic but awful, and see if your character can get through it. High moments, turning corners, killing characters, structure plot, larger plot structures. Now this I think came out before Game of Thrones, so I don't think we're going to have a lot of Game of Thrones references, but the idea of how do you get rid of a character you no longer feel is serving the story. It's an interesting discussion that, again, not a lot of books cover, so another reason to give this a good look. And then structuring plot and the larger plot structures, and then chapter 7, contemporary plot techniques. So the new shape of a novel, the character-driven story, self-discovery, and the plot-driven novel, non-linear narrative, and then tension on every page. So that's just the techniques of how you approach your storytelling. I would say at that point, you still have a structure to mind, but you have some flexibility in how you approach it. Okay. Chapter 8, multiple viewpoints, subplots, pace, voice, and endings. So we just covered the voice book not long ago. I think, was it last week's book? It was the one on voice. And, we talked about how it covers every facet of voice, including points of view, structure, and all that. This one is not nearly as in-depth, obviously, because it's, it's 20 pages versus, almost 300. But it does cover, the basics for you. So it covers the multiple points of view, successful subplots, narrative pace, voice, endings. And then I wonder if this actually is what that book has, because I know Donald Maass has an article early in the book, and I'm wondering if this was it. I don't actually remember now. But it's probably about the right size. Just curious if... is it familiar to me? No, I don't. Oh, actually, maybe. I'm actually wondering if this is the same chapter. It might be. Anyway, you get to read it twice if that's the case, so it's good though. Chapter 9, advanced plot structures, families, groups, generations, thrillers, crossover fiction, whole life, historicals, out of category romance, linked short stories, inventing your own advanced plot structure. So this is just where, again, you might look at books like The Godfather, how it's just interwoven, or even Game of Thrones, like we talked about. Again, not going to be mentioned in this book, but the idea of just having all these components come together to form a larger plot with a more advanced structure. This covers all of that, so it's good. Chapter 10, theme. Having something to say, step-by-step theme building, symbols, becoming passionate, right and wrong in the novel. That would be like your ethics or your moral message, things like that. The protagonist's declaration of purpose, what makes a theme universal, and then discovering themes. So again, theme is an important part of the storytelling process because, that's the thing that makes your story matter. Plot alone and character alone aren't good enough. If your character's, let's say a convenience store clerk, and the story is about how much trouble he has getting to work, and if there's no theme, then that's a really dull story. But if the theme is, having to deal with the problems with public transportation versus the problems with owning a car, and that has a greater, commentary on, life is unfair if you make under $5,000 a year or whatever the case may be, then you might have something else in that story. Now, you still wouldn't stop at that plot because that's too shallow. But the idea is if you have a message underneath without preaching it, you let the characters show that through their actions, then it becomes about something more poignant and allows your reader to kind of identify better with what's going on and enjoy it. And then, but again, you can read that section and kind of get that for yourself. Then the last section, chapter 11, breaking out. So this is obviously the conclusion. This is what it all adds up to. You have the sections are agent and editor, the pitch, outlines, breakout publishing, breakout living, success, sequels, series, and beyond. So it's like an all-purpose ending to what happens after you write the story. If you do break out, what can you expect? He's not saying you will break out, but if you do, here's what happens if you happen to be in one of those, high echelon camps. And, and then you'll notice he talked about sequels. When you're self-publishing, you can make your own sequels whenever you're ready. But in the old days, before self-publishing really took off, you wrote a sequel when your book was successful. You didn't do that. In fact, I had a discussion with a traditionally published author about 11 years ago, and we talked about my superhero epic, and I was already in the middle of writing book 3 at the time, and they're already giant books. And I was telling him the premise and all that, and then, the first question is, why are you writing the sequel if you haven't sold the first one? And I'm thinking, well, I'm writing the sequel because I want to be able to, if I have to retrofit my first book with information that seeds the next 3 or 4. You know, and like I'd like to just have the stories all ready to go just in case. But I understood his point was, why are you wasting your time? If your first book doesn't do well, then your second through whatever is not going to get picked up. So then, you know, you just wasted all your, you know, hard time and effort writing this book. And at that time, that was probably true. And I say with air quotes because Amazon had just started to take off. And if I had been a little more cognizant of that, I might have actually just said, screw it, I'm releasing these things on Amazon, and, you know, then maybe I would actually have a better background than this by now. But the thing is, like, you know, you don't really know until you know. And so that was sort of the point, was he was trying to give me good advice, and I think at the time it would have been. But it's also showing a lack of foresight of what the industry is becoming. So that's where I think, you know, looking at 2021's lens, I think I made the right call. I you know, because I don't have to write those books now because they're written. I just have to clean them up, make them work better. But you know, there's some things. I guess my point is, there's some things the book is going to seem antiquated about, because again, it is 20 years later. The industry has changed a lot since then. But the premise of storytelling has not changed at all. And if you are new to writing, I still recommend this book. You know, and again, I recommend this author. I'm going to cover his other books too. But this, in my opinion, is it's worth starting here because it is going to give you a full picture of the entire publication industry and development. And I think it'll give you good advice on how to structure your book just at the get-go. And like everything else I say, you know, you are going to certainly want your repetition in your practice. But if you start here, I think it'll be easier moving forward. You know, even if you need practice at the individual level, and, you know, go back and develop your craft as you go. Having a place to begin is always, you know, important. So, writing the Breakout novel by Maass, I do highly recommend it. And then as we go through his other books, we'll talk about that too. I will confess I've only read his follow-up to this. There's a couple more that came out since then that I haven't quite looked at because I did worry they were a little too repetitive of the premise, and they may very well be. And even when I covered, this has been so long since I've read this book, I really couldn't give you an honest impression whether or not it is an overlap. But I know the next one, which I'm going to do for next week's episode, I think it is more of a complement than an overlap. So that would at least be interesting. So do come back for that. And as always, like, subscribe, do all the things that YouTubers tell you to do. And if you want to support this channel or me as a writer, please go check out my books. You can go to Amazon and look me up, Jeremy Bursey. Or if my website's open by now, you can go to my website, jeremybursey.com, and take a look at what I'm offering. Just read carefully. Not every book is ready for viewer. They might be out there, but, you know, again, I was experimenting with a lot of my titles to see if I could even get picked up. So I admit that a few of them were not ready. So, you know, I'm going to be shaping my site in such a way where I'll be honest with you with which books you should get and which ones you shouldn't. If you look in the description below, though, you should already get a picture of which ones I promote. So if you really want a good read and a good support of this channel, I would say start with those. But other than that, you know, have a good day, and then make sure you come back next week, and we'll see what's next. So take care and have a good day. Thanks. Bye.